In the winding alleys and grand piazzas of Rome and other cities of the Papal States, one of the most brutal and chilling forms of capital punishment ever devised was applied by the secular arm of ecclesiastical rule. This method, known as the Mazzatello, also called mazzollatura, meaning to strike with a mace, mallet, was reserved for crimes deemed especially vile or treacherous. The condemned would be publicly displayed, brought to a scaffold, and executed by a heavy mallet stroke to the skull by a masked executioner. Then often the throat was slit to ensure death. Although less commonly used than hanging or beheading, the Mazzatello stood as a stark symbol of terror and authority in the Papal States. A reminder that even the temporal power of the Church could deal harsh, corporeal justice. In this script, we will explore the origins, the mechanisms, the societal and legal context, a representative case study, the human and institutional dimension, and then draw an ending reflecting on the legacy of this method. The story is strictly historically grounded, drawing on documented evidence rather than legend. The Papal States, Latin Patrimonium Sancti Petri, existed from 756 until 1870 as territories in central Italy under the direct secular rule of the Pope. As a temporal sovereign, the Pope and his administrative apparatus had to govern, maintain order, and enforce laws, including the most severe form, the death penalty. By the 16th to 19th centuries, the Papal States employed execution methods that ranged from hanging and beheading to more gruesome forms reserved for heinous crimes. According to records, the Mazzatello was one of these exceptional punishments. Why did such a method exist? The answer is threefold. Symbolic deterrence. Public executions served as visible warnings to the populace of the consequences of extreme crime or rebellion. Severity matched crime. Those crimes judged especially loathsome merited distinctive, more horrifying punishment. The Mazzatello fit that category. Institutional authority. As secular ruler, the Pope's government needed to demonstrate uncompromising control, including in matters of life and death. In this setting, the Mazzatello emerges not simply as barbarism, but as an instrument of political, moral, and juridical regime. The word Mazzatello derives from mazza, Italian for mace, mallet, or club, and mazzollatura means the act of striking with such a weapon. The condemned would be restrained at a scaffold, usually in a public square, for example in Rome. A stone base or block was placed, on which the prisoner's head would be positioned. A masked executioner dressed in black or red would be present, along with a priest acting as the confessor of the condemned. After prayers for the soul of the condemned, the executioner would raise the mallet, bring it through the air for momentum, and strike the prisoner's skull. Often the blow alone did not immediately kill. Thus, after the strike, the executioner would slit the throat to ensure death. One historian described the Mazzatello as one of the most brutal methods of execution ever devised, requiring minimal skill on the part of the executioner and superhuman acquiescence by the victim. Earliest recorded uses date back to at least the 15th century. For example, the 1490 execution of Cristoforo Castanea in Rome by this method or a variant. In the Papal States, the method was used from the late 16th century. It was effectively phased out by about 1816 in favor of other methods after reforms. Thus, the Mazzatello occupies a definite temporal window within the penal history of the Papal States. To give life to the cold facts, consider a fictional composite narrative based on documented practice, names altered where needed, to illustrate how the Mazzatello would have played out. Scene: Rome, Piazza del Popolo, summer afternoon, year approximately 1600. A crowd gathers. Noble families, magistrates, curious populace, guards in uniform. The condemned, let's call him Lorenzo R., stands bound, hooded, on the scaffold. A priest offers final absolution. The masked executioner raises a massive mallet, swings it through the air, and brings it down with full force on Lorenzo's skull. The crowd gasps. Lorenzo collapses. The executioner then draws a knife across Lorenzo's throat. Silence falls as the body is borne away. In the days prior, Lorenzo had been found guilty of patricide and the brutal robbery of a wealthy noble's household, crimes judged especially loathsome by the papal tribunal. The court's judgment: death by Mazzatello. The publicity of the execution served as the ultimate warning. To commit such crimes was to invite the most extreme form of justice. While this specific name is illustrative, it is grounded in the documented fact that the Papal States reserved the Mazzatello for the worst crimes and carried out the executions publicly. The executioner: Giovanni Battista Bugatti, Mastro Titta. The most famous executioner of the Papal States was Bugatti, who served from 1796 to 1864, performing some 500+ executions. Although by his time the Mazzatello was less frequent, the office itself encapsulates the grim machinery of justice in the Papal States. A man persistently walking between the worlds of capital punishment, public spectacle, and clerical temporal authority. Bugatti recorded details of each justice he performed, including method, location, and crime. The fact that his profession was documented indicates the institutional normalization of this grim role. The victim. The condemned facing the Mazzatello would have been paraded as example. For them, the punishment combined physical agony, public humiliation, and moral condemnation. Being struck with a mallet in the skull and then having the throat slit is a violent, final end. The public nature of the act, the presence of a priest, the scaffold, all signified that this was not merely a criminal death, but a ritual of justice. Given the religious political context, the condemned might have also been portrayed as morally depraved, in rebellion against the social and ecclesiastical order. The spectators, citizens, clergy, magistrates, all witnessing the sovereign power of the Papal State. Society and spectacle. In the culture of the era, public executions were part ceremony, part deterrent. The Mazzatello's brutality amplified the message. One historian of the Papal States writes that witnesses would take bets on how long it would take for a decapitated head to drop, etc. While such anecdotes may incline towards sensationalism, they reflect that execution was not a quiet act, but a societal event. Legally, the Papal States had a court system that dealt with criminal offenses under both civil and ecclesiastical law. Capital punishment was justified as the sovereign state's authority to remove persons who threatened the common good or committed crimes that outraged public order. The Mazzatello was reserved for the especially loathsome crimes, that is, those that by their nature or by public outrage required a distinctive punishment. From a moral standpoint, the application of such brutal methods raises many questions. In the context of the Catholic Church's doctrine, the Pope's temporal rule and spiritual role were separate. The Pope, as a temporal ruler, could deploy secular justice, but moral critics, in later centuries, cite the incompatibility of such methods with Christian values of dignity and mercy. By the early 19th century, legal reforms across Europe were moving toward more rational and less openly brutal forms of execution. In the Papal States, after 1816, the guillotine was introduced by French influence, and many older methods such as Mazzatello fell into disuse. The Mazzatello's use dwindled, and by the mid-19th century, the Papal States themselves were in decline, eventually being annexed by the Kingdom of Italy in 1870. The legacy of this method lies in its extreme nature. Historians cite it as a stark example of state-sanctioned violence and of how execution served as symbolic theater of power. The fact that it is remembered today signals how shocking it was, even in its time. Today, the piazzas are quiet. The scaffolds are gone. The stones where head blocks might have sat are relics. But the legacy of the Mazzatello is a reminder of how far societies have come, and how they once believed that supreme power could be wielded, literally, by a mallet. It invites us to ask, what happens when justice demands cruelty? And what becomes of a society that sanctions the spectacle of death for its underside?